Hello teachers and practitioners alike. This is the next video in the series about looking more in depth at what I'm doing, how I'm creating the work that can appear to look like we're just hanging out, having a good time. Hopefully we are still having a good time, but in a very different way. And this is breaking down the elements of cat and cow. And it's interesting how it's such a simple action to do, and yet there should be a lot more going on. It's not just a flexion and extension of the spine. For me, it's the preparation for everything that we're doing when we're creating a flow style class, because it's the initiation of how we activate the hands and the feet and understand those connections before we even teach something like downward facing dog or a waving vinyasa. So I'm going to get onto my mat and illustrate a little bit of what I'm talking about. So initially, when we find our shape in the cat and cow, we tend to look at a set of instructions that's about flexion and extension of the spine, right? Rounding the back, arching the back, or vice versa, however, whatever terminology you use. However, the movement doesn't really come from just the flexion and extension of the spine. It can, if I'm not really looking at the depth of what can happen here. But if I start the work from how the power of the hands and the power of the feet ignite all of the muscles, this universal core that I'm always talking about, if I'm working from the hands and the feet, I don't have to think about what's working in the spine. And this is what's a beautiful thing to use as an evolution into a waving vinyasa. So as I begin, that initial cow pose is the terminology that most of the world uses for this, but it's okay if you don't. Lifting the chest, lifting the sit bones, but now let's focus on what the hands are doing. Keeping a soft bend in the elbows, so we're not locking out the elbows, and drag the hands back. Imagine the hands are trying to move towards the knees. You should feel not only the front of the body activate a bit, but the muscles below the shoulder blades, I now have access to those, and that will be the middle of the trapezius, it'll be the lats, it'll be the spinal erectors. Everything back there should start to fire up. If you find students still have their shoulders up around their ears, talk about moving the shoulder blades or the shoulder heads away from each other. Don't get stuck on the terminology of shoulder blades down the back. That gets overdone without a qualifying action, right? So there's that slight dragging back and a slight pushing away at the same time. That really activates everything. If I push the tips of the toe pads into the floor, then I activate the thighs and the pelvis as well. Now as I take the next action, it's a pushing the hands forward, pushing the big toe joint down especially. Then I can get that sense that this is a protraction in the shoulders, the navel hugs in, and the front of the body works, not because I'm isolating those movements, but because I'm getting that sense of pushing the hands forward towards the front of edge of my mat and the feet down into the floor. So that I continue these two actions, I'm thinking of initiating the action from the hands and the feet to lift the chest, that dragging back, and a pushing forward to get that rounding. So I can slow this movement down and make it very, very active. The triceps, the upper arms will start to work. The biceps will start to work because I'm not locking the elbows. This will give me strength in so many other ways. Now, if I'm going to introduce this into a baby wave, I can stick my hips back towards my heels, walk the hands a little bit forward. And this is the initiating of how I teach any kind of waving vinyasa. The sensation that I'm pushing from my feet. Remember, the action's going to come from my feet, not just me shifting weight forward. It has to come from somewhere so that I understand where momentum is initiated. So if I think about the feet pushing the hips forward and move through that cat pose, rounding, 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 as soon as the chest arrives above the hands, the center of the hands, then I start that dragging back to lower the pelvis. It's that same sense in cow pose. Elbows slightly bent, dragging back, slightly out. And when the toes keep pushing down and then the heels get involved, then I find that lifted upward facing dog. To reverse the process, I can put the knees back down, then push the hands forward, round through the back. I'm moving through a cat pose to get all the way back to what I call crouching puppy. Just one more time, pushing from the feet, moving through the rounded cat pose. Then once the chest is above the hands, drag the hands back, lift the chest forward, lower the pelvis. The upper back is active because I've already experienced that in the cat-cow action. Now as I push the hands forward, send the navel in and up, activated by the hands, not just the navel isolating, to push the energy back. And when I work this way, then as I'm developing the sequences and I'm adding a full waving vinyasa, the information is already in the body. I don't have to unteach people. And that's a really important thing. If we train the body to recognize what the connections are in a very simplistic way, then when it comes time for me to develop things, I'm not having to make it really complicated. I can literally just refer to cat and cow. Remember the muscles that activate when I'm working with cat and cow. So give that a go and see what happens.